They used the box as like a coffee table. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Crue Trime. Crue Trime. Crue Trime. If you are new here, hi. My name is Sarah, and what I do here is tell you a terrible story to ruin your day and put on my makeup at the same time. So if that sounds like fun to you, you are in the right place. So make sure you subscribe to this channel, hit the bell notification, and then that way you will never miss one of my terrible stories. Today's story is an oldie, but I really gotta expand my vocabulary. Anyway, this story goes out to all the club kids and ravers from the 80s and 90s, back when New York City was a dangerous pit of drugs and crime, like God intended. This is the story of Michael Alig. Okay, I'm going wild today with this makeup. By the way, I don't talk about the makeup as I'm using it, but if you want to know what it is, look down in the description box. Everything is linked. Also, one more nugget. A lot of the details from this case come from the autobiographical book Disco Bloodbath by James St. James.
Welcome to my face.
James is a legend from the glory days of New York City's club kid scene.
Star of compromising positions.
And the morning after.
There is some debate regarding the accuracy of everything in the book, but you can judge for yourself. I'll link it down below. Here we go. Actually, I'm gonna put my hair up in like a wig cap because I'm wearing a wig today. There she is. In April of 1996, police were called to Oakwood Beach at Miller Field in New Dorp, Staten Island, New York. So some kids were playing on the beach and they found a big box that had washed ashore. Here's a tip. If you ever find a box or a suitcase on the edge of like water or maybe even like a road, don't open it. Well, they opened the top of the box just to take a peek. One little peek can't hurt, right?
What's in the fucking box?
Apparently, it definitely can, because inside the box was the torso of a man. Again, don't open random suitcases. Ever. So when the police arrived, they took the box and the body into evidence, and they later said that after looking into the box, maybe it had been dumped overboard of a freighter. The New York harbor is just like non-stop container ships. Well, the body was so waterlogged and severely decomposed that they were not confident that they would ever be able to identify the victim. In fact, they didn't think that they would get any traction on solving this crime at all. So who was in the box? How did it get there? It's a long story, and we're gonna have to start by rewinding about 20 years. On April 29th, 1966, Michael Alig was born in South Bend, Indiana, to Elka and John Alig. Elka had moved to the United States from Bremerhaven, Germany after marrying John, who was in sales. Michael was actually their second child, their second son, and unfortunately their marriage fell apart pretty quickly after that, and they were divorced by the time Michael was about 4 or 5 years old. So Michael didn't have a close relationship with his father. After the divorce, the contact there was pretty limited, and his dad didn't seem to be, super interested in him anyway. He was very close with his mother, and growing up in South Bend, Indiana, Michael was an excellent student, but he was viciously bullied in school. Michael knew that he was gay, although he wasn't necessarily out. Not yet, anyway. And back in the early 1980s in Middle America, being gay was weird and it was rough for kids. And as I mentioned, Michael's mother was very loving and supportive. She says that she didn't realize that he was gay until he was in college years later. Well, Michael graduated from Penn High School in 1984 with straight A's, and that earned him a scholarship to Fordham University in New York City. He originally studied architecture before transferring to the Fashion Institute of Technology, FIT. And that is where he truly found his people. He met a fellow student there who introduced him to club nightlife. So at the time, it was a very inclusive environment. It didn't judge people for being themselves. It was a haven for gay kids, drag queens, creative rebels. Some might say freaks. That friend was actually the boyfriend of an artist, Keith Haring. Yes, the actual Keith Haring. He was throwing a party at a club on Hudson Street. And at that party, Michael was home. Pretty soon, Michael dropped out of FIT and started working as a busboy at one of the clubs, Danceteria. So, Danceteria was a very popular nightclub in New York City, and it actually moved locations a couple times. This place would draw massive crowds and like the who's who of the underground club scene. The difference between Danceteria and like Studio 54 was Studio 54 was really meant to attract celebrities and like rich people, the bourgeoisie. Danceteria was cooler than that. Paintings by Keith Haring and Basquiat hung up on the walls of the club. They wanted people that were interesting, you know, emerging. People that weren't famous now, but would be like 2 years from then. It was very exciting, very cutting edge. Many people that you've heard of now started at Danceteria. For example, there was a young girl who used to work the elevator of the club. It was like an old-fashioned manual elevator. She was definitely trying to be famous. You know, she was an aspiring performer. There was one evening where she put on a show up on the rooftop of Danceteria. Of course, there's no lights up there, so she had her 3 backup dancers with flashlights, and they were dancing along to the song and flashing their lights on her to light her up. Very creative, you know. Anyway, that girl was Madonna. Other people that launched their careers out of Danceteria include Depeche Mode, Cyndi Lauper, Sade was a bartender, you get it. Well, when Andy Warhol died in 1987, some people thought that the nightlife in New York would die with him. Not so. In fact, it was as strong as it would ever be, and it continued that way well into the 90s. And some might say that Michael Alig led the charge. So by this time, Michael had become quite interested in club operations. He was, you know, paying attention, trying to learn the ropes so that he could one day, you know, have his own club, run the club, and he also got into party promotion. And these parties he would throw were wild, like these eyebrows. They're going to make sense later, I promise. Part of what made these parties so amazing were the people. Michael surrounded himself with the most interesting characters, and he called them club kids. Some of these kids included partygoers, other promoters, influencers of the day. These are like the original influencers. It was people like Ernie Glam, Lee Bowery, Suzanne Barch, Amanda Lepore, James St. James, of course, and, you know, somebody called RuPaul.
This is RuPaul Rodriguez Castelli.
The list just goes on and on and on. You might remember seeing some of these characters on these 80s and 90s daytime talk shows like Geraldo, Donahue, Sally Jesse Raphael. You know what I'm saying?
Love your haircut. I mean, it's just sensational. Well, low maintenance. I see that. It's great.
I don't know. I guess they're jealous because I'm having a lot of fun and they're not.
Michael was planning and promoting various parties at various nightclubs all around New York City, but it was kind of hot and cold. Some of the owners were excited about Michael's influence. Others were afraid of the club kids being a problem. In 1988, Michael was hired to work parties for Peter Gatien, owner of the Limelight and apparently a Bond villain. The Limelight was actually a series of clubs in like a chain of different nightclubs in 5 different cities in like 5 different states. The point is there were multiple locations. The one in New York City was the most infamous location. It was in a converted church on 6th Avenue in Chelsea. It wasn't doing well at first, you know, empty. Nobody was showing up. And people called it the Slimelight, which honestly would be a pretty cool name for a club, if you're asking me. But after Michael took over the task of promoting these parties, things really blew up and the Limelight became like the place to be. Michael eventually took over planning and promoting for Peter's other clubs, the Palladium, Tunnel, and Club 2000. So promoting parties and nightclubs wasn't as easy as, you know, making an Instagram post or whatever people do these days. So Michael had to think outside the box in order to create the necessary buzz that would attract enough people to fill up the clubs. Interesting people to fill up the clubs. So Michael would throw these things that he called outlaw parties. So these outlaw parties essentially were just like thrown anywhere. Just some random place that he didn't have permits for or permission or anything at all. But like it would be a McDonald's in Times Square, a subway car, bodega. Basically, he would post up flyers saying that there's this party at this location, be there, be square, you know, and then like 50 to 100 club kids would show up, flood the place, and they would party for as long as they could, you know, until the police would show up, break it up. The point is it worked. You know, people knew when there was a Michael Alig party, it was going to be a good time. Also, in the early days, Michael was very anti-drug. So much so that if he found drugs on his friends or anywhere in the clubs, he would flush them down the toilet, and he would kick that person out of the club. However, his parties at Peter's clubs became so notorious for like how raunchy they were. Okay, so at first they were mildly raunchy. You know, they were doing hot body contests, pageants. Those would eventually lead to full nudity. It became kind of a theme, you know, trying to see what you could get people to do for like a $50 prize. $50. It would start with, you know, hot body dance contest, $50. Showing butts, $50. And then, you know, front butts. So it wasn't just nudity that was so scandalous. It was more about pushing boundaries, finding the limits, and then going way past. Things like going on stage to pee in a cup and then drink it. Speaking of pee, which is a fun phrase I never thought I would say on this channel, that was one of Michael's most favorite party tricks. He really got a kick out of peeing in people's drinks, either without them knowing it, or if they did know it, how fun. So gross. He would also like stand on a balcony at the Limelight and pee onto new bartenders. So there's actually another explanation for this wild and wacky zany behavior. Michael said later in interviews that he had been diagnosed with histrionic personality disorder. And people diagnosed with histrionic personality disorder are like overly dramatic, extroverted, vivacious. They're not bad things, but it's like all the time, over the top, on 100 all the time. Essentially, it's like a diagnosed drama queen. It's a little hard to believe that Michael was anti-drug, but it didn't last long, obviously. So eventually, Michael did start using drugs. It's inevitable in that kind of environment. In the club scene, especially during that time, it's just drugs. So many drugs, all the drugs. Remember, part of the fun and part of the vibes, especially in Michael's parties, was like excess, no limits, no boundaries. So the drugs were very, very present. He and the club kids very much enjoyed drugs like ketamine, methamphetamines, cocaine, ecstasy, rohypnol, you know, just to name a few, on and on and on.
Roofling, there you go with that word, roofling. Roofling. What the hell is a roofling?
These clubs were flooded with drugs, and Michael even put dealers on the payroll to make sure that the partygoers had party favors. One of the dealers that was on the payroll at the Limelight was a guy named Angel. Who was Angel? I'm glad you asked. Andre Angel Melendez was born on May 1st, 1971 in Colombia, South America. I almost said South Carolina. No. A little more south. His parents were immigrants who moved him and his older brother Johnny to the United States when they were just little kids. Johnny would later say that his little brother Andre was a sweet little boy that was surrounded with friends, little girlfriends. He was a social butterfly. When Andre entered his teen years, he started to withdraw a little bit, but he wouldn't talk to anybody about it. Turns out, you know, he was struggling with his sexuality and how he felt his family might perceive him because they were devout Catholics, or at least Catholic enough, and he thought that they wouldn't accept him as gay. Once he graduated from high school in 1989, he moved to New York City to reinvent himself. So remember I told you that the club kids were on those daytime talk shows all the time. Well, some kids like Andre came to the New York club scene looking for them, to join them. So when Andre got to New York City, he went to the Limelight and he met Michael, but didn't make much of an impression at first. He was dressed normally, and remember, in order to stand out, you have to really stand out. And most of that was done through outfits and outlandish makeup. Well, Andre adopted a new persona when he came back to the club. He became Angel. Angel typically dressed as an angel, white clothing, giant white feathery wings, big tall boots, the whole thing. Well, this ensemble definitely got Michael's attention, which is what Angel wanted. And Angel wasn't necessarily interested in Michael for a relationship, he just wanted to be included in the group. The kids. He also realized that a way into the group was to provide them the drugs that they wanted. So through some friends, Angel made connections and started dealing drugs at the Limelight. So around that time, former New York City mayor and current national embarrassment, Rudy Giuliani, was pledging to clean up the streets of New York.
Oh, we hate that fucking
And he is often credited with revitalizing Times Square and West 42nd Street, but those efforts were actually started in 1980 by Mayor Ed Koch.
I think Ronald Reagan is a wacko.
Anyway, the majority of the city in those days was not nice. Well, more not nice than today. There was a major effort to crack down on criminal activity, particularly drug users and drug dealers. So, of course, one of the first places that was targeted was the nightclubs. Because, the drugs were instinctively flocking like the salmon of Capistrano. So Peter Gatien owned 4 big, successful nightclubs that were very profitable. So, of course, he became one of Giuliani's targets, and the Limelight was raided in October of 1995. Michael got arrested for drug possession several times, and he also went to rehab several times. But he never stopped using. After that raid in 1995, Michael and pretty much everyone else lost their jobs. So after lots and lots of legal trouble and a failed rebranding, the Limelight closed. And all of those on-call party favor suppliers were cut loose, including Angel. Side note, the building that was the Limelight is now a shopping emporium and fitness center. How dreadful. Some sources say that after being fired, Angel moved in with Michael in his Riverbank West apartment. Michael's version of the story is that on March 17th, 1996, the doorman called up to his apartment to let him know that a visitor was downstairs named Angel. Michael allowed him up, or he was already there. Either way, what happened was Michael and Angel ended up getting into a dispute over money. Rumors say that money had been stolen from Angel, or there was a long-standing debt that was out of control. Michael later said that Angel came to get his pay from working at a club that Michael was managing. Either way, Michael had another roommate named Robert Riggs, who went by the nickname Freeze.
My name is Freeze. Learn it well.
This was a Sunday morning, and at this point, they had been awake for 2 days, probably because they were running parties all weekend and, out of their mind on drugs. Michael claims that he asked Angel to just, come in, take a nap, and then he would go to the club later with him to retrieve the money. Angel got mad and there was an argument. Then Freeze made a little nasty comment, something to the effect of, "That's why nobody likes you, Angel, because you're a drug pusher." That's probably why they did like him, but anyway. Angel turned to Michael and said, "You gonna let him talk to me like this?" But before Michael could do anything, Angel allegedly went for his throat and started choking him. Him being Michael. They both tumbled across the room and bumped into a large cabinet with a glass door front, like a china cabinet. The glass broke. It was everywhere. A big piece of it cut Michael, on the back of his neck. He yelled out for help, and then Freeze came in, tried to pull Angel off of Michael, and then he grabbed a hammer. He hit Angel in the head multiple times until he, let go of Michael. Michael then held a pillow or something over Angel's face until he stopped moving. Then the two of them, Michael and Freeze, backed away for a minute. Hold on to your butts for the rest of this one, friends. So in this attack, they hadn't meant to kill him. This was clearly self-defense. right? Freeze said that he left the room for a time, and when he came back, Michael was pouring Drano into Angel's mouth, and then he took duct tape and taped around his head. Why would they pour Drano in his mouth? Why not just call the police at this point? Well, they were high as shit. And the actual details of what happened that day are a little fuzzy, but they were scared. There were lots of drugs around, and they were involved in things that could, get them in trouble. So they dragged Angel to the bathroom and put his body in the bathtub. They filled the bathtub with ice and more Drano and cleaning products, whatever they think or thought would mask the smell of death. So then they took the drugs that Angel had on him, which was a lot. Remember, he's a drug dealer. And they got high and went out to a party. They were so out of their minds on drugs that they thought that when they finally came home that he wouldn't be there. Angel was still in the bathtub, and he stayed there for almost a week before Michael finally got rid of it. Michael told Freeze that if he could get him 10 bags of heroin, he'd just take care of everything. Michael would later say that he was sort of planning to kill himself, by just taking all of this heroin, and then there would be 2 bodies, and it would be somebody else's problem. Well, Freeze came through with the dope, Michael got super mega out of his mind high, and then he went into the bathroom and cut off Angel's legs. Then he stuffed them in separate bags and then put those bags in duffel bags or whatever, threw those out in the regular trash. Then they took the rest of Angel's body, wrapped up in another giant trash bag, and then they found a big box down in the basement of the apartment building, and they put his body into this large cardboard box, taped it up, and then the box stayed in the apartment for another week or something like that. And then they had friends over to have cocktails. They used the box as a coffee table. One of their friends later said that she remembered coming over around that time and Michael was wearing Angel's boots. She remembers also putting her cocktail on that box and just sitting there, not knowing what was inside of it.
Oh, what's in the box?
She said the apartment smelled terrible, and when they asked about it, they said that there was just something wrong with the pipes. The plumbing. So when Michael and Freeze finally got around to disposing of this box, they brought it downstairs using the main elevator. They put it in the trunk of a yellow cab and then had the cabbie take them down the West Side Highway to the river. And then for an extra $20, the guy helped them dump the box into the water. They just told the guy that the box was full of old dishes and rubbish that they didn't want anymore. And apparently it's just perfectly normal to just dump your trash in the Hudson River. After they dumped the body, the guilt of what they had done had really started to eat away at Michael. He started telling anybody that would listen what happened, but in a joking way. If somebody asked, "Hey, where's Angel?" he would say, "Oh, I killed him and cut him up into pieces and put him in the Hudson River."
What?
I mean, of course, nobody took him seriously, and Michael would later say that it was kind of a relief to essentially confess this to other people so that he wasn't carrying around this secret himself anymore. He actually confided the whole story to a couple of friends, one being James St. James. For most people, especially the ones in the clubs, they thought it was a big joke, some elaborate plan that Angel was hiding out and he was going to come back in a big way. Angel's brother Johnny started coming around asking questions. Johnny started the questions with Michael because he had recently seen Angel with him recently. Did I just say recently a bunch of times? He said that Michael couldn't look him in the eye when he talked to him about Angel.
I spoke to Michael, he didn't want to face me. He was talking and facing this way and that way and looking, and he didn't want to look at me at my eyes because me and my brother, we look alike a lot.
He was most definitely involved, but he didn't know how. Johnny Melendez actually went to the police to report his brother missing, but because Andre, Angel, was involved in the club kids' nightlife scene, the cops were not in a hurry to go looking for him. Instead, Johnny made up missing persons posters and put them up all over town himself, offering a $4,000 cash reward for any information that would lead to finding Angel. Meanwhile, rumors in the nightclub circuit were running wild. One rumor said that Johnny's head had been cut off and was in a freezer in Brooklyn. Another one said that his hands had been cut off and were some in Staten Island, and most of the rumors included Michael, who just couldn't shut up about it. Well, Michael Musto, journalist for the Village Voice, started writing about the story. Initially, it was a blind item that was published on April 23rd, 1996. Yeah, that's the right date. It was about a missing club kid from the scene, and it had details about the murder, but it didn't name names. But anybody who was paying attention knew who he was talking about. It very clearly implicated Michael and Freeze. Michael skipped town, and Michael Musto had been writing about Michael Alig's rise and fall from the very beginning. He celebrated what was exciting in the scene, and he called out when things went to shit, which was often involved Michael Alig. So Michael and another club kid friend got in a van and rode away to Denver, Colorado. Of course, they were doing all the drugs, and Michael actually needed to stop on the way in Indiana because he was getting sick from withdrawals. So he landed in a methadone clinic for a couple of days, spent a little time with his mom, and then they continued on. Those articles about Michael, like the blind item and all that stuff, were published while he was gone, by the way. And they made sure to say in the articles that he skipped town. So the day after the blind item was published in the Village Voice, actually New York Magazine and the New York Post picked up the story. And it went bananas. Meanwhile, Michael and his friend were gone for like weeks, and they ended up stopping in Chicago to see another friend of Michael's named Screamin' Rachel, who actually wrote a song about the club murder.
That's why I got to be free.
Michael wasn't really interested in getting sober, and he missed New York, so he ended up going back. So with all this publicity around Michael, he went back to party promotion. One of the articles that ran in the Daily News called The Limelight, the honey trap. You know, since the club was so attractive to young people because of the drugs luring them in. So Michael decided to run with it. So they had little jars of honey made with special little labels that advertised a Michael Alig party called the honey trap. They handed out these little jars all over town, and it seemed like Michael was back on top. But then, on November 2nd, 1996, the police found Angel Melendez. The box that Michael and Freeze had dumped in the Hudson River had floated on down the New York Harbor around the corner to the Oakwood beach on Staten Island about 6 months before. But remember, the police had no clue who was inside. Well, then after all these news articles got all this traction talking about a murder allegedly by a hammer, the police started squinting. The man from the box had blunt force trauma to the head, and there was also a missing person that was linked to the club scene. The investigators were able to compare dental records to make a positive match. About a month later, on December 5th, 1996, 30-year-old Michael Alig was arrested in Toms River, New Jersey, in the hotel room that he was sharing with a boyfriend. Robert Freeze Riggs was also arrested that same day and confessed immediately. On October 9th, 1997, both Robert Freeze Riggs and Michael Alig pled guilty to manslaughter and were sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. Remember, this was an alleged case of self-defense.
Prison, honey.
In 2010, Robert Riggs was released on parole. Michael spent about 5 years of his sentence in solitary confinement because he kept popping positive for heroin, and after serving about 17 years in prison, Michael Alig was released on May 5th, 2014. So Michael's parole conditions required him to undergo drug and anger counseling, and he had to abide by an 8 p.m. curfew. He got into the local art scene doing paintings and art shows. He starred in a couple indie films, got back into party promotion, but he also had a YouTube channel with another club veteran named Ernie Glam. Notably, Michael worked with Screamin' Rachel and some other friends to host virtual Zoom parties during the COVID lockdown. These parties were so popular that the NYPD actually investigated because they thought that these were real in-person events. Unfortunately, Michael wasn't able to stay sober, or at least reasonably managed, and he racked up a few drug possession and trespassing charges. On Christmas Eve of 2020, Michael Alig was found dead of an accidental heroin/fentanyl/meth overdose. He was 54 years old. So there are a ton of documentaries and features and movies about the life and times of Michael Alig and the club kids scene of the 80s and 90s in New York City. I'll link a few down in the description box. There's also a fictionalized version of the story in a movie from a few years ago called Party Monster, if you might remember, starring Macaulay Culkin and Seth Green. But that is the story of Michael Alig. If you're interested to know any of the crazy, wild crap that's on my face today, just look down in the description box. If the product is no longer available for purchase, I will link something similar. This could be a very fun look for Halloween, coming up soon. Thank you so much for hanging out today and for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you want to see more videos like this one, then consider subscribing to this channel before you leave today. I upload new videos here on YouTube every week, and you can follow me on most of the other socials as well. If you have a Crue Trime story that you would like to recommend to me, look down in the description box. There's a link to a Google document where you can input all the dirty details. I would love to hear from you. And that is it for now. I will catch you next time in the next video. Bye! It's all over my teeth. I don't know what I'm doing with this makeup. This is very elaborate. This is taking fucking way long. There's one hair. There we go. Gotcha. Gotcha, bitch. The doorman called up to Michael's appointment. 2000, nope. Histrionic personality. Clubs. Ooh, and there is now glitter all over my face. God, that looks terrible. Where are we going? I don't know. His name is Peter, right? Fuck is all over my face.